probably the most common that we see across a variety of different firms. In fact, these probably exist in what I'll call the majority of firms. So we won't go through and elaborate on all of them here, but we thought putting up a list that people can probably relate to is important.
So this is what you're feeling. This is the pain that is getting you to say, what's the burning platform? How am I moving forward? This is probably it of what you're dealing on a daily basis. So this means you're going to take action. You want to move forward to come up with, how do I engage experience management, go from thought to be able to get to implementation. Dave and Chris, with their vast experience of doing this, not just with experience management, but all of the technology buyers they've worked with over the last couple of years, they've outlined the buyer's journey, as we like to call it. So I'll let Dave and Chris take it over.
Yeah,
go ahead, Chris. I'm going to let you introduce
thinking
Penny.
of, what do we see most commonly? We've probably over the last 17 years helped close to 200 firms successfully select and implement all types of technology, lots of CRM and e-marketing and experience as well. And, you really feel like it's almost like we're calling it pinball wizard, because you're banging your head in a bunch of different directions. And depending on your firm, that will depend on which direction you tend to be bumping your head against. And we're going to walk through a few of those. Let's look at that first one, Clinton. So when we look at the pinball journey, right, we've got on our left the internal stakeholders that we're dealing with, and on the right in the green balls, the green pinballs, those are the external influencers. So these are all of your constituencies. So, and we'd also like to introduce you to our little character here, who we have affectionately named Penny. And Penny is typically bumping her head in a lot of different places. So in this first one, this is sort of a typical buyer journey number one. It's tech driven, right? We need technology. We need a tool. Hey, let's get that bright, shiny object that all the firms in the building and across the street have. And then we'll be able to compete more effectively. Let's get a tool, right? What usually comes out of a purely technology-driven selection process is hours and hours of time spent online research, at conferences, over cocktails. Hey, what are you using? Hey, what are they using? Go to your peers and ask them, what have you done? What do you think we should do? Let's go to the vendors. Let's talk to them, because they're going to give us a really good lead on what we should be doing, because they've got a lot of experience. What typically comes out of this is a lot of time, a lot of demos, a lot of frustration. And if a system does get bought, typically a lot of wrong purchases. Our biggest business is helping firms reselect technology because they didn't get it right the first time, or hopefully become at least more successful with the technology that they did pick, even if it wasn't quite the right fit. A lot of it's people and process, and you really have to focus on that. And so, the tech-driven, bright, shiny, you can spend a lot of money and still not get what you need. Now, this next journey is more budget-driven. We've still got a problem. We've got all those problems we saw on that slide a minute ago, but we've only got this much money. So how can we fix our problem with this much money, right? We've got to have something, but it's got to be something we can afford. Maybe we'll do it on a spreadsheet because we've got Excel. I tell you what, we're really budget conscious. We're going to go to our COO and let the executive director type folks run the process. And they'll come back with you with a micro check that, hopefully can solve maybe one of your 100 problems. Still, again, you've still got 99 of those problems because budget, not requirements, are driving the process. If you can make a case for the value, you can get the budget, because if you do this right, you're actually going to be not only saving money, but making money. So you have to sort of get past the COO, and, get to the right ones. And then, there's 10 great vendors, but we really can only look at one or two because we just don't have the money for the big package or the one that everybody else is using. But let's throw out an RFP. RFPs are great, right? 20 pages for the vendors to fill out. We have done a ton of RFPs. We create them. I have a 30-page RFP that firms ask us to put together for them, and I've done it, multiple times. Does it ultimately really help them in the end? Oftentimes, I'd say no. It's a really expensive, time-consuming process for you and or the consultant and or the vendor. And nobody really likes it. But at the end, the value is often not there, because what ends up happening sometimes is then you go to the demo phase and people look at the demos and there's the bright, shiny object and they buy the one with the most bells and whistles anyway, despite having spent all this time and effort on an RFP. I watched a client. We did this entire process, the RFP, we did no fewer than 20 calls with 2 vendors. And ultimately, they needed to check references. And I know they didn't do it because I know what the references would have said about the vendor they ultimately selected. And I don't think they placed the calls. So it can't be budget driven. It's got to be a thoughtful process. Then what we see, well, let's put it to a vote. Let's do a little crowdsourcing. Let's get everybody on board. Let's get everybody excited. But then let's see how much possible data can we capture. Let's just put together what the framework's going to look like in all the fields. This is very tactical. Like, what are all of the fields in the world that we could possibly capture? And let's do that. Let's do that. And again, this is great to put together a framework for perhaps, what's needed, but doesn't get you to the technology that solves the problem. So then we have another one. We've always got that one person on our team, or in my experience, that happens. I hope it happens for you. Somebody that we call the eager volunteer, and we're going to affectionately call her Val, right? So Val comes to you and says, I know we have these problems. I've got a great idea. Let's get some experience technology. I've seen all these, I've read all about it, and I really think that this can solve our problem. And so at the highest levels of the marketing and BD team, or even at the firm, the idea becomes, hey, that's a great idea, Val. Why don't you run with that? Let us know how that goes. Get back to us with all the information and we can make a decision. Let's crowdsource this bad boy. What a great idea. Unfortunately, these are big projects. CRM marketing experience management probably is the biggest of all of the projects. And you've got to have not only team leadership, marketing leadership, BD leadership, IT leadership involved usually, but you've also got to have firm leadership and champions involved, because if you don't, these are projects that are often going to stall. And you most likely, you spend all this time and effort and you probably still end up with either no system or the wrong system. And you're still back to your, 101 problems. The other one we see often is analysis paralysis. Let's look at everything and then we'll be able to make a decision, right? Have you ever been to Amazon and you go looking for something just really just basic or even something esoteric, and you're like, I just want to go buy the thing, right? And you get 100 pages of 10,000 results and things that you had no idea existed. I get laughed at by people who know me because I'm going on a project. And they're like, oh, Chris is going to go buy something. The search begins. In a month, I'm looking for food processors right now. You don't want to be around me. I can tell you anything you ever wanted to know about every brand and type of food processor, but it's been 2 weeks and I still don't have one, right? It's the same scenario. Let's look at all the systems. Let's get demos. Let's get marketing and BD demos. Let's get the attorneys on the demos. Let's have everybody do every demo. Let's look at every feature and every function and every field. Let's scope out all the integrations with every system that we have, and we're going to drive people to use it every day in their lives. And what ends up happening is a lot of cumulative wasted time of everybody, the team, the vendors, the attorneys sometimes, great ideas, not so much execution. And again, Probably no system selection because we have analysis paralysis.
Gotcha.
So what do we do? Clinton, what do we do?
What do we do? And this really, we want to provide a framework for you, a methodology by which we recommend. And if you were part of the masterclass #1, we talked about the first step, which was really strategic, the strategy. And today we're going to talk about the requirements. So if you missed masterclass #1, you can go and take a look at the video. It's out there. But the quick synopsis is this. It's really an idea to understand how you're positioning the project. What are the big strategic drivers that you're trying to solve, and the things that you need to take into consideration that you can then start to determine your priorities, your decisions, and your actions. And in other words, what is your strategic intent? And now what are the requirements that we need to be able to achieve the results that we're looking for? So it's not a big process up front, but it's those quick ideas of what do we need to consider? What are our constraints? What are our advantages? What are those immovable objects, champions? All of these things is usually a good half-a-day discussion with the appropriate folks within the firm. But now what happens here is you go back to Penny and the various ideas that people have when they bounce out to a journey. What we recommend, based upon the experience of Chris and Dave and myself, is now's the time to get a little bit knee deep on these requirements that you're looking for. And they come into these 3 buckets: business requirements, the functional requirements, and the technical requirements. In a way, you can look at them as the why, the what, and the how. But they're starting to get a little bit more granular than that strategic level, which requires you to go into that requirements process of getting the right voices at the table and thinking through some of your key things that you're looking for. This is relevant if you're starting something, and we see it frequently if you're having to rethink something. Go back to your original business requirements. Are they what you're looking for? So I wanted to make sure that this isn't just you're starting from a white board. This can also be something to verify what you're doing or bring you forward. So when you think about that requirements, sounds like a lot. How do you go about gathering those requirements? Because it's not 3 data points, it's multiple data points. And Chris and Dave have done this a long time. How do you go about gathering those requirements? How do you, for a leader of EM, to be able to gather those requirements in those 3 areas without jumping straight to technology, by the way, which we'll reaffirm over and over again in this presentation?
Yeah, the last thing you want to do is have vendor demos be the first thing. Because I had a client I worked with a while ago, and they had bought some technology. They bought some of the most advanced technology on the market. It was a smaller firm. And they were frustrated. They paid a lot of money for it. And they said, come in and do what we call a success assessment. And so we did, and we asked all the key stakeholders, this is what you do. You have meetings with key stakeholders. In firm leadership, obviously marketing and BD is a big meeting. IT, other folks that need to be involved. Sometimes if you're going to do a time and billing integration, you might need finance or accounting involved. If you're going to have other people doing the entry, you might need them involved. Often, you need secretaries or assistants involved because they're doing data entry. You might have, some of the associates involved in experience because you might need them to do data entry. You're going to have partners involved. You have people that you need to have champions involved. What this firm had done, though, is they had seen demos. Everybody sat on all the demos. And they had a basic idea of what they wanted, but every time they saw a new feature, they wrote it down, and they wrote the next one down. And by the time they were done, they had this huge laundry list of features. And the only one that could absolutely do everything that they liked was the most expensive one, the biggest one, biggest price tag, biggest feature set. So when I interviewed their stakeholders, everybody said, the basics of what they wanted to do were really simple. Listed event management and some other features, they had basic requirements. And I said, why did you buy this other system? Well, it was the only one that could do everything that we saw in all the demos. but they didn't need to do all those things. They didn't care about 99% of those things. So they ended up wasting 2 years, a lot of time, money, and effort, and went back to a very simple technology that could do what they needed. So you really want to talk through with your stakeholders different things for different topics, or different topics for different groups. When we talk to attorneys, we talk about how this technology is going to provide value to them. That's different than how it's going to provide value to marketing and BD. It's different than how it's going to provide value to other key stakeholders, right? So, each conversation is structured in a slightly different way. So we need to make sure that each set is asked different things. And, one of my favorite criteria is, what does experience management success look like from your point of view? What are the problems that your distinct group is trying to solve? What would value be to you? Is it going to save time? Is it going to help you, automate processes? Is it going to help you with pitches and proposals? Is it going to help with laterals? Is it an issue with the bios on the website? What is experience management going to help for your particular group? What does nirvana look like? Right? And what do you see as challenges along the way? What are some of the roadblocks that we want to put those orange cones in front of so that we don't fall into a pothole, from your stakeholder point of view? And they're going to be different. And what are we going to do to communicate effectively throughout the process? Because that is really important. The value has to be echoed in your communication plan. And for big technology implementations, a communication plan, especially for the bigger firms, is really important. So you're now defining value for each of your stakeholder teams, and that needs to be reflected and echoed throughout your communication plan. Dave, any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that it's important to let everybody know that, because as you were talking, Chris, there's a tendency to look at and create this massive list of requirements that we might need at some point. And so we want to make sure whatever we buy could do all that. But what we have found through projects, and by the way, I didn't coin this phrase, but it's one of my favorites: complexity is the enemy of execution. And you have to have a level of simplicity and achieve success in steps along the way. You can't, I don't know, to mix metaphors, you can't eat the whole elephant at once. And so, I think that's really a key point that you were making, Chris, is that, you really have to focus on your requirements. All the requirements that another firm has might be interesting, but they may not be your requirements. And so we think it's very important for a firm to stay focused on what you need and not get caught up in what other firms are doing.
And the other thing I found that can be helpful is, when we come in as outside consultants to do this sort of a project, we have seen all the different types of technology. We sort of know the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we'll be honest about, the challenges and the issues. And by the way, you need to, be prepared that the integrations are going to help you with this, but they're going to cost some money. And as attorneys, I can tell you, we really care about understanding, like we want to know the good and the bad. And it actually helps make a decision if the attorneys feel like they understand, not just what the providers say is, everything's going to be, wonderful and fabulous. And the clients are going to line up at the conference room doors with bags of money, because that's what happens when you implement technology, right? They really want to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. And they want to ask questions. They want to feel like they've really gotten all their concerns addressed. But what you're also doing is you're getting them on board. You're making them part of the process rather than just having technology later sort of thrust upon them and they're told that they need to do whatever or use whatever. This is making them, part of the stakeholder team.
Yeah. I'll add to this. And that is, I mentioned it a little bit in the masterclass #1 for one of my clients that needed to get a better insight across the firm. We pulled it back a level and we surveyed the firm, but we didn't survey the firm for what do you want in experience management. We surveyed the firm and its partners for what do you see are bright spots and barriers to collaboration within our firm. That was the approach, the bright spots and the barriers to collaboration. And by identifying the barriers, we were able to then, we kind of knew it was going to go there, but it backed into gathering the insights and the pain, the quotes that identified the pain that we could use throughout the change process to be able to then say, okay, experience management is your solution. If you're dealing with something larger, perfect example of that came in 1 year after a merger of equals of two law firms. And they didn't quite understand why there wasn't the synergies that they were looking for. We identified the barriers to collaboration. Experience management became one of the solutions. And so you may know that you need experience management, but if you have to pull it back one level, you can do that. But that does take time. But it might give you the buy-in you're looking for to then kick off a detailed requirements gathering.
Yeah, I like that. Bright spots and barriers is great. And that's, there's no budget associated with that, right? It's just people feeling like they're heard. But then
Right.
you put those all together into a communication plan, and you continue throughout that plan to talk about and articulate again and again bright spots and barriers that came from your key stakeholders. Great stuff.
Right. Outstanding. So we'll go to the next one. Now we get into a little bit more into the detail, and we talked a little bit about the front end of the people side, which is now you really start putting yourself in the shoes of the individuals that you're trying to provide a greater benefit for. And that is, what is their, and Dave used this phrase, what is their day in the life? What is the problem that they're dealing with on a daily basis? And what is the solution we're trying to provide? And I even love the bottom bullet point, which is, if we don't do this, what's going to happen if we don't do this now? Is it an if? Is it a when? That's what we have to start then thinking about ourselves, not as a marketer, but as the professional or the stakeholder we're trying to solve. And as we move to the middle, then we get into the process point. And this is where I have fun, where I've had fun in my firms. And that is, now you really start to map out the process. The technology and the knowledge is there to enable a process. You know the old phrase, people, process, and technology. But pick out the processes that are causing the pain, the people engaged in processes. How do you do it now? How should you be doing it? How can we improve it? I remember back when I was the consultant at Dr. Anderson, it was the old days of doing the stickies up on the wall and matching the stickies of here's how it flows step to step. And now we do it using technology, but it's very similar. Who starts it? Who gets the next handoff? Who has to do what with it before it gets to the next handoff? Really have to think through this as a process, not as a single point in time of I need knowledge. Knowledge for what?
Yeah.
Chris, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, no, that's a huge thing too. The people and process really is always our focus, because, technology fails a significant portion of the time, but usually it's not the technology that's the problem, it's the people and process. And see, especially with experience management, there's so much gathering of information that has to be done. How are we going to gather it? Some of it can come from integrations and technology, but there's always a human element to it. And it's in many firms, it can't be the attorneys. It can't be the partners, certainly. So,
Right.
What's going to be the process where the technology gets us only so far? How are we going to get the rest of the way to the finish line? And who's going to help with that? And how is it going to be done? And how do we make it as minimally time consuming and painful for them as possible? And how do we show them real value?
And I'll get specific on this. It's amazing how many law firms I still speak with that do not have on a single sheet of paper their process of how they manage a proposal, how it comes in, who handles it, what are the checkpoints, and then who builds it, how does it improve, all of these things. How do you map out, for example, proposal, staffing a particular engagement, bringing in a lateral? What do those processes look like on a single sheet of paper? It doesn't have to be 10 pages. What does it look like on a single sheet of paper? And now take it down to the user level. What's the process of a search, defining a search, acting on results from an experience management system, and how do you extract it? The one that always gets me is the system is great, but I can't get it out of it in a usable format. What is that user experience look like? These are processes. One's a person process, one's a technology process. So we help identify, we help you map through those. We have best practices, but some of them will adjust based upon your resources, your people, and the size and the culture of your firm. And now we'll move over to the technology side.
Yeah, and so, there's a level of this that's technology, but you do have to do, some cost benefits. What is the system cost? That's great. You need to know that. But then in many cases with experience management, you're going to be dealing with integrations, right? So you've got all this information related to people, and you have to think about, because we're a people business, everywhere that we've got information on people is potentially an opportunity to push or pull information. So we've got firms that are thinking through, well, I've got bios on the website, and I've got bios in the proposals. I've got, bios in the pitch packets. There's all this different information. Should I be entering it in 3 different places, or should we consolidate that in one system? And, you've got bio data in the CRM as well. So you've got now 4 systems. You've got bio data in the HR department, you've got it in the IT department. So we're looking at what, 5 or 6 right now. If we're going to interconnect those, which is going to be the system of record? The one for personnel may need to be HR. And, often that data should not, or only limited parts of that data should flow to other places, but almost never would it flow back there. If you're going to do time and billing integrations, that's a great thing to have, that's where all of the data is around the work, but usually that's going to be a one-way push. Almost never will you push data back to time and billing. And then you've got all kinds of different bio creators for the website. Do they integrate? You've got to think through all of this technology, before you make a decision. Oh, and by the way, each one of these has a cost point. I would say probably between $10,000 and $50,000, depending on the system that you buy and the systems that you have, and that can be for a single integration point. So, there may be a cost benefit that you do that, yeah, hey, it'd be great in Nirvana. We'd like to have this and this and this, but maybe for phase 1, we just do that. And then next year we do this one. And then in the 3rd year, we'll do another one, and get limited successes, small projects, limited successes. People are really excited, communicate successes, and then repeat. Because again, like any technology experience, this one's definitely not a one-time gig, right? You do not do a project for experience. It will be ongoing. You also need to take into consideration staffing. Do we have, last year, I could tell you there's a unicorn in the room, and that person is someone who is an experience management individual for 2 or 3 specific types of experience management software. Everybody I knew wanted one, and this hasn't been around that long, and there aren't that many of them. And so, boy, if you had one, you had full-time employment last year, and probably again for the next few years. So, if you don't have that person and you can't find the right noose to grab your unicorn, then maybe you're going to need to outsource some of this, and that's okay too, because there's a lot of knowledge out there. So, go to your consultants, go to the vendors. And ask, how should we be doing this? Should we hire it? Should we outsource it? And then you have to have a plan for sort of reining all this in and making sure that you keep it on time and on budget. But remember, initially, like I have a firm right now that's like, okay, we're ready to do our demos, and we'd like to have this fully implemented by year end. That's a nice idea, but is it realistic? I think you then have to sort of take your timelines and your budget and do a reality check by getting proposals and, going through a negotiation process and getting some timelines. Maybe you can get just something done this year, but almost any time that we've worked with a firm that they're like, this is our timeline, I rarely have seen one, actually fully meet it.
That's a great.
Go
ahead, Dave.
To kind of bring up that, is just kind of amplifying what you've been talking about is, in some systems, you can have data that, maybe doesn't change a lot, or because it's internal, it may not have to be perfectly written. Experience management is very people process driven, because so much of the information ends up client facing in a proposal or on the website. And so the amount of time that has to be dedicated to making sure that this is ready for public consumption is very different than a lot of other systems. And I think there can be a tendency for firms to kind of underestimate the effort that is required to take even one matter and take it from sort of what I'll call that internal jargon abbreviated version that exists in your time and billing system and get that ready for public consumption. Somebody has to write that, somebody has to edit it, somebody has to make sure that it stays current as laws change and as experience changes. So so the people process side of experience is very I would say it's more work than most of the other MarTech systems that that a firm has.
We'll take this and now we're gonna jump down. We're gonna take one of these bullet points and I want to bounce down, do kind of a deep dive on one that's constantly asked by all of us. And that is, what we're going to talk about is the knowledge requirements, the knowledge fields. Everybody kind of wants to start out by saying, what should we capture? This is what I have. Well, let's talk about that a little bit and how we would walk through a person in thinking about the knowledge that they need, because this is where it goes back to Dave's complexity. I have a few slides. So this is kind of my case study area from my experiences. So the first one, this is a general framework as you want to look at it. When you think about all the stuff we can capture as it relates to what we call experience. And experience is kind of a limiting phrase. It's a lot more than just experience, but we use experience as that phrase. And as you think about it, I've highlighted here in the left-hand side of what we consider to be the core fields. If all you had were those fields to the left-hand side of this PowerPoint, you have a basis of being able to add value to the processes that you have, a baseline of value. So if you had to get out of the gate, minimal cost, minimal time, minimal resources, we're talking to you about here's what you're looking for. As you extend to the right, as we all know, we all get excited about the information we'd like to have. As you get to more fields, more detail, the value increases, of course, but the probability of getting it for every one of your experience matters decreases, and the probability of your quality decreases. So this is where you have to weigh, what are your objectives? What was your strategic intent by which you wanted to start or have a outstanding experience management project? When we sit down with an individual and you think of all these fields, and by the way, this framework rolls up to roughly 75 to 80 potential fields that you could have related to a matter. When you look at this,
Hey, Clinton, I did
yes,
want to say one thing. I want to give
yeah,
you some
please.
credit on this too. For anybody who didn't see the first part of this series, Clinton has this amazing sort of colloquialism called the best ofs. And if it's really a way of kind of figuring out, we've got a lot of experience, but what are the ones we really care about and why? You know, it could be a premier client, it could be something new and unique, you know, that nobody else is doing. But if you haven't experienced best ofs, there is a link in the chat, and go watch the recording of the first one, and you'll get a really nice description of the best ofs, because they're super important.
Thanks, Chris. I'm passionate about that. I love that. That could be a whole masterclass, but that'll be later. So as you think about it, what we want to get to an end result when we think about requirements, here's an example of a requirements document, very concrete of what we're looking at. And I'll show it in a different form in the next slide. But really what you're looking at is you're walking through in a discussion with the client saying, what is the field that is interesting or I think is relevant to us under the name? And then you say, do we have it now, or do we need to get it? Is it new? And then as you continue to the right, and I'll show you in a PowerPoint slide, the details as it relates to each field. When you look at this, it really starts to show you the complexity of what you're looking at in a wish list and a have list. So let me get you down to what this looks like when you think about the larger. This is that Excel spreadsheet from the column standpoint. And I want to highlight 2 or 3 of them that are real gotchas if you want to think about it that way. The first one is the data quality, the 4th bullet down. And that is, you have some information, but are you confident in that information right now that you have? Do you need to go through a cleaning process before you go forward? Because if you go forward with junk, you're going to have junk in whatever's your new solution. Do you need to have a stopping point right now and say, wow, we have a lot of work that we can do as a marketing and business development team before any of our professionals are asked to do something. Let's not utilize their time to clean up stuff we can. But what are those things? The second one is field structure. That's a big, hairy one. And that is based upon the field you choose. It is a single pick list. Is it a multiple pick list? Is it open text? By the way, open text is the death of quality data and being able to aggregate it, sort it, and get to analysis. But sometimes there's just fields that require an open text. You have to determine, can you get to a pick list? A natural one here in the multiple pick list is going to be the services related to an experience record might be a great example. Single pick list might be the industry related to an experience record. And then this last one, the second to last one, probability of completion. What is the probability that each attorney, without making it a required field, I get we can use that stick, but what is the probability that the contributor can give you the information you're looking for and give it to you correctly? That might be the spelling of a client name. You're not sure, but you have to think through that probability. Each of these then gets you to the bottom one, which is, okay, what are our core fields? This is what we must have as opposed to what we'd like to have or what goes into a phase 2. So from here, I'll talk about the 2 case studies and I'll quickly wrap that up so we have Q&A. Okay, I'll finish in 4 minutes on this one. Here's the first one. Talking about in Masterclass 1, had a client that was really focused on using experience management as the backbone to a collaborative culture, and in particular, giving each professional the ability to have equal access to opportunity, to be found. And so we needed to advance the process of not only do I find a piece of experience, that's what I'm looking for. Hey, should I contact this individual? Should I staff this individual? So we needed to capture more about the professional. We needed to capture not only their experience, but what are their skills? What are their affiliations? What organizations are they joined to? What are their aspirations? What do they want to do more of? This is in particular important for associates and new partners that don't have a strong track record. So you can't project based upon their experience. You're projecting based upon what they want to do and helping them grow their platform within the firm. And then the last one is availability. If you go through search and experience, find the person, wow, I know, like, and trust them, we have commonality. If they're fully staffed, you just did that entire search and you can't even use them on your staffing engagement. So you had to bolt on availability into what was an experience management platform. So this is an example of when we look at all we could capture, we doubled down on more information about the professional, create a more collaborative environment. If you move to the second one, this was the one, global firm, large, had a strong IP practice. And we were dealing with really heavy RFP matters because the moment you get ranked in the top 100, all of a sudden you're now on all RFP lists, whether you know somebody at the client or not. So what we had to do is we doubled down on the matter detail, and in particular, this litigation case detail that we had. So what we did, and I'll bounce it out to here, is this is an example of the fields. Now, this is aggressive. This was a culture that we were okay in getting this information, in particular from the IP department. This is aggressive in the amount of fields we had. And you notice the ones that are pick lists and the ones that we, instead of an open text amount field, we made it into ranges. But look at the top 2. This goes back to our culture. This firm said it would commit, because it was important, to capture case citations. And the third one, the related technology. That's a big deal in an IP firm. Maybe not everywhere else, but they wanted to know, where have we specialized in particular technologies? So those were part of the fields that we said we needed to capture. So this is an example of walking through and connecting strategy to requirements to the knowledge components that we had to capture and in what form. So this is what we help you walk through or at least think through in the workshops and the things that we would do when you go through that requirements gathering. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris and let her kind of wrap up on all the good stuff we've done and what we could do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, we're really big on key takeaways and trying to share information and best practices. So I hope some of this was helpful, but just to put a point on what we've talked about so far and give you a few additional tips, you know, figure out your biggest constraints. What are your challenges? And again, you know, those orange cones that you want to put out there so you don't fall into holes. Make sure that you have the right scope, time, and cost. I've seen, you know, scope creep be a huge problem on some of these projects because they didn't have the scope right up front. They didn't understand that to get to X, you had to integrate with Y, and boy, again, that's another $10,000 to $50,000. So if you've got all that up front, you'll put the budget, you know, right up front, then you won't exceed it. But a lot of times, you know, you have all of these ideas and things that you want to do, and, you know, you don't really understand exactly what's going to be required to execute in terms of cost and integrations and staffing and all the things we talked about. Determine the top 1 or 2 objectives that you've got to meet and make that your starting point, right? Start small, deliver successes, communicate successes, get another objective, you know, and keep going. You know, again, like Clinton said, balance the value of the additional data with not just the probability of getting it, but the time required to get it. I'd have to add as well. You know, and these projects are big projects. And again, they are not going to end because they're not really an initiative. They're an ongoing project. So start small. Then, like Dave likes to say, crawl first, then walk, then run. And, you know, actually running might just be a bunch of different crawling on top of, you know, on top of different projects to get you to the run point. It doesn't have to be a sprint out of the gate. Remember, though, this technology, there's a lot of people in process. There's a lot of moving parts. And those parts are humans, a lot of them. And so planning is going to be absolutely important. And that's what's going to set you up for success. If you don't have requirements and goals, you should not go looking at system demos. It just doesn't, you know, you're going to end up just like Penny banging your head all the time. And in doing it, you know, make sure you have best practices. Not everybody has done this, but people that we know have done this, and always reach out. Don't do it alone. You know, reach out to peers, talk to the providers, talk to us and the consultants. You know, reach out to us. We've got a great resources section that can help as well. And we're always here to help you be successful. Some of the ways that we help, some of our core services are, we do these success assessments. You know, there's strategy and planning workshops where we go through all of these requirements gathering, challenge identification, goal setting workshops. And we put this into what I had a client call it a blueprint for technology success. And I said, I like that. I'm stealing that. What a great way to describe it. But it really does set you up for success. It's, you know, it's not just here are the systems you should look at. It's, you know, here are your potential challenges that we want to avoid. Here are the problems we want to solve, the processes we want to automate. Here's how we've defined success. Here are our goals, short-term, intermediate, long-term, and maybe even aspirational. Here are the ones on a timeline that we're going to do first. And here's how we're going to measure success. And then we're going to communicate success. You know, one of the things that we do a lot of is communication strategy, putting together, you know, just like an external branding campaign. A lot of times marketing technology, especially for big firms, you need an internal campaign around success and value, you know, and incorporating all of those the bright ideas that Clinton had talked about. You know, we also do, even in advance of that, and if you need help with surveying, you know, figuring out, you know, what are those, Clinton, what do you call them, bright spots and
barriers,
bright spots and barriers. We can help you identify those. We've got all the documents that you can use to survey, you know, your key stakeholders, you know, before you even start inviting them to the initial workshops. And then, you know, our consulting and guidance can be used throughout the entire process to make sure that, you know, you don't fall into those potholes and that you have all the strategies you need, because a lot of firms, you don't have anybody that's ever done this before. And, folks like Clinton, that we're honored to get to work together with him. He's done this 4 times for 4 of the largest organizations in the world. And we're always here to help. So feel free, we'll take a phone call anytime.
And we'll get to Q&A. We're just finishing up right here of what you'll see in Masterclass 3, or in case anybody has Q&A that's worthy of us doing more deep dives on this, we can do that. So is there anything, Dave, any questions that you wanted us to answer? Because I think we finished up with a good 5-6 minutes left.
Yeah, and so here are some of the upcoming sessions we're going to focus more on. And again, session 1 is in the chat if you want to watch that one. But we're going to talk through all of the people and process stuff, going through this assessment and evaluating the vendors and doing what we consider and call a vendor demonstration roadmap, so that all of the needs and requirements and goals that you have are mapped up in a document you provide to the vendors, so that, you don't get a dog and pony show. You actually get a really good demonstration of the things that are meaningful and relevant to your firm and your attorneys, and your needs. And, also helping to evaluate the providers, negotiate the system, make sure that you get what you need when you need it at the price that you need, and helping you figure out which integrations will make sense and which ones perhaps, can wait till later. And then how to not only implement, but be successful in that implementation, how to sell it, to get everybody on board, and then to not only succeed in phase 1, but then in phase 2 and phase 3. And, some firms may have a phase 10, who knows, how to grow this from a single or 2 successes to make it more valuable over time and do more things with it. Some of this technology is incredibly flexible, and people have done some really interesting things with it. And you should learn from them as well. Clinton, you want to put that back up and put the last slide up?
How about that? Sorry about that. Look at
Yeah,
this.
no
Here.
worries. We're always happy to
out too
connect with
fast.
you too. And so we've got
yes.
our QR codes on that last slide.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's what I
talk
get.
to folks.
There you go.
There you go. So feel free, scan these QR codes and you can immediately connect with either or both of us on LinkedIn. And I'm a big fan. Show this idea to your attorneys, because odds are good they may not even have seen it, and they will think that you're a rock star, because you're all rock stars. Now we want to take some questions, make sure that this was relevant to your needs. What questions do you have for us? We've got a few minutes left.
If anybody has anything, just feel free to put it into the QA or the chat.
Yeah. I would think one of the questions that I've been asked is, what is a timeline? And I've had a timeline of getting data ready on this. I've had where one person was the only individual that could dedicate time to cleaning up an Excel spreadsheet, and that took them 6 months. One individual, one Excel spreadsheet, because we really didn't want to distribute it out. I've had where the timeline, in looking at 2,000 experience matters, we were able to separate it across a marketing and business development team of 10 people, and everybody got a couple hundred matters. Now, we had to watch, because then you're not in the same voice, but then you really have to make sure that your structures of experience management, when they're written, and your pick lists are well understood by everybody on the marketing team, for all of them to add value to it. But that's when we had to punch something in 3 months. And that's all you can do is all, as we call it, as everybody knows, all hands on deck, to be able to meet a particular timeline. But if not, one voice is beneficial, and having a clear structure to an experience management record is important. And I'll tell you, a gotcha is a title. When you go to search an experience record in an experience management technology, what pops up is not 2 paragraphs. What pops up is a title. So the title is incredibly important in how you have a consistent structure to the way you title an experience record to be seen, whether it's an internal search result or it's an external bio. So that was a question I've had recently.
Yeah, and Clinton, one last question, and it deals with how do you decide what records go into your website and other places?
Yeah, based upon, we used to have a benchmark. I've used a benchmark at all the firms. Is we try to say, If you're an experienced partner, you should have a minimum of 10 records showing on your bio. If you're a partner starting out, you should have 5 records. And if you're an associate, you should have, if you're at least 2 years in, you should have 3 records. Now, of course, records are important in how you phrase those records. And I go back to the challenge of saying, is it 1 record per multiple attorneys, or is it an individual record per individual attorney? If you do that, an associate can begin their record with assisted, supported, coordinated, whatever's the appropriate verb. So that way they're not overreaching on their bio, what it looked like they did from an experience standpoint. It's easier if you do 1 record per 1 individual. You might have duplicates, but if you have, but those were the benchmarks, and that's the key to the benchmarks. We went 10, 5, 3. Sometimes it could be, that doesn't mean those are all the records that you contributed. An experienced partner, we expected 20 to be contributed, but a minimum of 10 to show up on their bio externally. That's the biggest message. A big message to give to internally is what you contribute to the experience management database is not just what you're going to show on your bio. You're helping the entire firm with your collective experience, even though you may not want to sell it or be known for it. Having that experience made what is average to you, maybe the tipping point for a bio for another area of the firm. So you really have to think through that best of and how many people contribute each, and give them those benchmarks. If you just tell them, give us your best stuff, they won't contribute. If you give them a number based upon their seniority, they have a bogey to go after. Hopefully that's helpful.
Well, Clinton and Chris, thank you very much. I've had a number of people in the QA in the chat say thank you to you guys. So thank you, but thank you for all of you that attended. You gave up part of your day to be with us. We absolutely appreciate it. And anything that any of us can do, please feel free to reach out. And we look forward to having you as part of Masterclass 3